Today's episode of the Top 10 Contraventions Issued to SASM Members in 2022 deals with the Regulation 7-3, Respiratory Protection Devices. It's got one thing going for it. It's a big one. Let's look at the first part of the regulation. Respiratory Protective Devices 7-3-1. If a worker is likely to be exposed to dust, fumes, gas, mist, aerosol or vapor, or any airborne contaminant that may be present in any amount that are harmful or offensive to the worker, an employer or contractor shall A. Provide an approved respiratory protective device for the use by the worker that 1. Provide suitable and adequate protection to the worker from one or more airborne contaminants. 2. Is the proper size of the worker's face. 3. If a tight fit is essential to the proper functioning of the respiratory protective device, makes an effective seal to the facial skin of the worker. And 4. If a tight fit is essential to ensure the worker is not exposed to one or more airborne contaminants to the extent that may pose a risk of significant harm to the worker, has been fit tested by a competent person in an approved manner. There's a lot to unpack here. First, this applies to both harmful and offensive airborne contaminants. So if someone complains about the product being smelly, but the chemical is not hazardous, you can offer the worker a respirator. If the respirator requires a tight fit, the worker must be shaved to make the seal to the facial skin. If the airborne contaminants pose a risk to the worker requires a fit test to ensure the respirator makes a proper seal. SASM does fit testing. We use a computer-based port account, which can be used on all NIOSH-approved air purifying, air supplying, and N, R, and P series filtering face respirators. Qualitative fit testing does not rely on the sense of taste, smell, or irritation in order to detect the leakage. Instead, the port account measures real-time fit, with the user simultaneously performing a series of moving, breathing, talking, exercises designed to stimulate the same moves made in the field. If you're looking for fit testing, contact our SASM office or make contact through the sasm.ca. When you have your workers do fit testing, you need to keep records. 7-3-5, an employer shall ensure that the following records are kept as long as the worker who was provided with the respiratory protective device is employed by the employer, and that the following records are made readily available for inspection and examination by the committee or representative as the case may be. A. Records respecting fit testing for each worker that is completed pursuant to subclause 1A4. B. Records respecting the results of the assessments for each worker that are completed pursuant to clause 2D. C. Records respecting training completed by each worker pursuant to subsections 2 and 3. Although 7-3-5 indicates the records must be made readily available for inspection, you still need to safeguard confidential personal health information the same way as any other personal information or records in the employee's file. 7-3-6, an employer shall ensure that any records mentioned in Clause 5B respecting a worker that are made available for inspection and examination pursuant to subsection 5 do not disclose any personal health information as defined in the Health Information Protection Act respecting the worker unless the worker agrees to that disclosure. Although others are not able to see the worker's health information, the workers themselves can see them at any time. 7-3-8, a worker may, at any time, inspect and examine any records kept pursuant to subsection 5 or 7 that relate to the worker. As with all equipment in the facility, workers must have training to use the equipment correctly. 7-3-2, if a respiratory protective device is required by subsection 1, it is provided to a worker. The employer or contractor shall ensure that the worker, A, has been trained by a competent person in the proper testing, maintenance, use, and cleaning of the respiratory protective device and in its limitations. B, can demonstrate that the worker, 1, understands the training provided pursuant to Clause A, 2, can test, maintain, and clean the respiratory protective device, and 3, can use the respiratory protective device safely. C, test the respiratory protective device before each use. D, is assessed according to an approved standard as being capable of wearing a respiratory protective device. And E, is adequately informed respecting the reasons for the assessment required pursuant to Clause D. 3, an employer contractor shall ensure that the training required by Clause 2A includes practical experience by the worker in an uncontaminated environment. SASM's Training Management System, or TMS, has respiratory protection theory available online, but there is a significant hands-on requirement to the training that must be completed on site. So the supervisor or trainer needs to ensure the workers can demonstrate the skills. Don't forget to document that hands-on training. With training comes responsibilities to do what the training indicates. 7-3(1)B, ensure that the respiratory protective device is regularly inspected and maintained in an approved manner. And C, ensure that the respiratory protective device is kept, when not in use, in a convenient and sanitary location in which the respiratory protective device is not exposed to extremes of temperature or any contaminant that may inactivate the respiratory protective device. Of course, respirators come in many forms and for many different uses. There are a couple situations that have legislative requirements. 7-3(4), if a respiratory protective device are used only for emergency purposes, an employer or contractor shall ensure that a worker who may be required to use the respiratory protective device is given semi-annual refresher training in its safe use. So, if you use an atmosphere-supplied respirator as part of your confined space rescue program or any other emergency situations, semi-annual refresher training is required. But that's not the only requirement. 7-3(7), an employer shall ensure that records respecting the maintenance of atmosphere supplying respirators are kept and made readily available for inspection and examination by the committee or the representative, as long as the worker who was provided the atmosphere supplying respirator is employed by the employer. How can you tell if the airborne contaminant is hazardous? Check the safety data sheets. It will indicate what PPE is required to keep the worker safe. You also can have air quality testing completed by SASM to understand the airborne contaminants in your facility. As always, if you need more information, you can contact SASM advisors or go to sasm.ca and contact us there.